His body just erupted. It became a battleground. The only cure at the time was arsenic. Terribly painful, like a body becoming another body. It all started shortly after his mother died. It continued throughout his life.
His body just erupted.
In 1848, Tocqueville warned, "We are sleeping on a volcano. A wind of revolution blows. The storm is on the horizon." That year, Marx and Engels completed the Communist Manifesto. Jean-Martin Charcot, who would later devote himself to the study of hysteria, enters medical school. The same year, revolution swept Europe. Students and workers united, but 3 years later, the revolution was toppled.
Looking back 15 years later to the failed revolution.
Dear Engels, one thing is sure, the era of revolution is now once more fairly opened in Europe, and the general state of things is good. But the comfortable delusions and the almost childish enthusiasms with which we greeted the era of revolution before February 1848 are gone to the devil. Old comrades are gone, others have fallen away or decayed, and a new generation is not yet in sight. In addition, we now know what role stupidity plays in revolutions and how they are exploited by scoundrels. Let us hope that this time the lava pours from east to west and not vice versa.
He writes with nostalgia and longing for something thwarted, for something that didn't happen.
France, May 68. Students and workers united in a 3-week general strike demanding radical democratic reforms. Momentarily, revolution seemed possible, but once again, that possibility was soon dispelled. In the decades following 68, like the aftermath of 1848, the defeat of forces of change left traces, absences, an unfilled place where something is wanting.
Dear Frederick, 2 hours ago I received a telegram that my mother is dead. Fate claimed one of my family. I must go to Trier to settle my inheritance. I myself stood with one foot in the grave.
Writing Capital, his narrative of the conditions of the English proletariat, his body broke out with a proletarian disease. Marx was desperate to finish his work, but unable to. Instead of writing, he was being written. The revolution he anticipated, the thwarted revolution, was displaced onto his own skin.
Dear Fred, it is clear that on the whole I know more about the carbuncle disease than most doctors. Here and there I have the beginnings of new carbuncles, which keep on disappearing, but they force me to keep my working hours within limits. I consider it my vocation to remain in Europe, to complete the work in which I have been engaged for so many years, but I cannot work productively for more than a few hours daily without feeling the effect physically. I think that this work I am doing is much more important for the working class than anything I could do personally at a congress of any kind. I would consider myself impractical if I had dropped dead without having finished my book, at least in manuscript.
His body just erupted.
Dear Kugelman, cut, lanced, etc., and short-treated in every respect. In spite of this, the thing is continually breaking out anew. I hope it will end this week, but who can guarantee me against another eruption?
Writing Capital, imagining Capital's overthrow, his body living out his split identifications.
Dear Frederick, you see I am still here, and I will tell you more. I am incapable of moving about. This is a perfidious Christian illness.
Marx took up the task of exhaustively analyzing the historical moment in which he found himself, the rise of industrialization and the inception of the working class movement.
In the meantime, I can neither walk, nor stand, nor sit, and even lying down is damned hard. You see how the wisdom of nature has afflicted me.
He stripped the facade of capital to reveal what was concealed, the labor in the commodity, the alienation of the worker, naked exploitation by the capitalist. He looked to the material foundations of the moment. He looked to the body.
Would it not have been more sensible if instead of me it had been consigned to try the patience of a good Christian?
His analysis of capital relies on a language of the body: production, consumption, reproduction, circulation. For Marx, the collective wealth of the state is the body, the labor of the workers. Capital amputates the worker from his own body. He has phantom pain for his missing limbs.
Like a true Lazarus, I am scourged on all sides.
But for Marx, which bodies were absent, unspoken, unacknowledged?
What's a real body? A natural body. It doesn't exist. There's only the social body. The body as theater. The body that speaks. But in whose language?
As he nears completion of the first volume, his carbuncles, mobile, sardonic, and insistent, break out in ever-new vicinities.
His body became sarcastic.
Seizing the flesh, sculpting it into a body bulging, protuberant, not closed and finished, not refined.
This wasn't a body you could take into the drawing room. This was an ill-mannered body.
You have too low an opinion of the English doctors if you think that they cannot diagnose carbuncles, particularly here in England, the land of carbuncles, which is actually a proletarian illness. It is only in the last few years that I've been persecuted by the thing. Before that, it was entirely unknown to me.
Marx, who would disavow the opposition between the social and the psychic as mere bourgeois psychology, was possessed of a body whose symptoms mocked the social order. It had become grotesque, open, protruding, extended, secreting, in process taking on new forms, shapes, his body the figure of the new society that had failed to emerge. He was producing more and more body, too much body for a social order dedicated to its concealment.
Dear Engels, it was good that you did not come on Saturday. My story, now 14 days old, had reached the crisis point. I could talk a little, and it hurt even to laugh on account of the big abscess between nose and mouth, which this morning has been reduced at least to reasonable proportions. Also, the violently swollen lips are becoming reduced closer to their previous dimensions. May the head of the devil go through such 14 days. All this stops being a joke.
What a problem the body is. The creation of a meek, submissive, hygienic public body.
Capital produces a disgusting body, so it can create new regimes, new products, to police it and make it acceptable. Capital has achieved historical advances in the threshold of delicacy. It produces new varieties of bourgeois disgust, then markets a new and improved body without byproducts, without smells, to exist in a public sphere that is increasingly phobic about the collective body, the lower class body, the mob, a body that might not mind its manners.
And I figure that's the best bed I have because I hate my legs.
I would just never expose my stomach, ever.
Yeah,
Never. I could
guess
never
I
wear a
would.
half shirt.
I'll take this size 14 pair of shorts and then with the size 5 belt because my hips are rather large.
I have a
Sorry.
really big problem with like just the roll.
Over the
You wouldn't think you'd have fat back here, but you really
over
do.
the bathing suit roll.
Yeah. But you can't see the string on me because my fat covers up the string.
But see, I think white fat stomachs are uglier than tan fat stomachs.
Oh, I'm always conscious of the way I sit. I'm like, okay, I'm sitting like this. You should
I'm
push.
always like that. Whenever I'm sitting like somewhere, and that's why I like hate summer clothes. I hate summer clothes.
Yeah.
I hate exposing my body for some reason, and I'm always conscious of like, how am I sitting? Am I sitting like this? Can you see my stomach?
How do you exercise that part of your body? Like, what do you do to get this out of there, this thing right here?
Cut it off.
I mean,
or something.
no, I refuse to, like, I let him order first. And
I
if he's
pretend I'm
eating light-
dieting. I've done every single diet.
Really?
I've done
You
3.
done Slim Fast?
I
I've
want
done
to
Slim
try
Fast,
Slim Fast.
Weight Watchers, Weight Loss Clinic,
But don't you
all-
know
I
that
could
there's
write a
like no
story.
way that the diets work?
I feel so uncomfortable eating in front of my boyfriend, in front of any guy.
You
But
just feel so
can't.
much better. I mean, you're so full. And
I
you just feel
have
so
a
much
friend who
better.
used to do it, and she'd eat huge salad. This is a trick. You eat huge salads, you gob on all the dressing and everything, and that's easy to you know,
Right.
regurgitate or whatever. Regurgitate.
Women's bodies as tablets of social meaning, as sites of regulation.
Anorexia, bulimia, epidemic in abundant Western societies post-1968. 10 to 20% of American women now have eating disorders. Let's wrest this out of secrecy, out of the private sphere, and view it for a moment as a social, collective act.
With our increasingly phobic relation to the collective body, the working class body, with our creation of an ideal public body without fat, without snot or BO, with a yearning for refinement, we will the disappearance of the body, the containment of the mass, the body politic, the threat.
Marx, writing history from below, a history of wealth as labour, a history of the body, a history of the mass, his own body acting out.
Stories told by the body. After the failed revolutions of 1848, this comes to be known as hysteria and sweeps through Europe.
Dear Frederick, I would have written you sooner, but for approximately the last 12 days, all reading, writing, and smoking have been strictly forbidden. I had a sort of eye inflammation tied up with a very unpleasant effect on the nervous system. The thing is now so far under control that I can again dare to write. In the meantime, I have all kinds of psychological reveries, like a person going blind or crazy.
Marx's symptoms make their appearance around the time that Freud's future teacher, Charcot, is beginning to recognize and treat a new disease, traumatic hysteria. Charcot began to recognize that what is novel about traumatic hysteria is that in these cases, what lay behind the symptoms were not physical disorders, not just nerves, but ideas.
Male hysteria is not all that rare. And just among us, gentlemen, these cases are often unrecognized, even by distinguished doctors. That is strong and vital worker, never prone to emotional instability before, should become hysteric, just as a woman might. This seems to us beyond imagination, and yet it is a fact.
Dear Fred, I wanted to write you yesterday from the British Museum, but I suddenly became so unwell that I had to close the very interesting book that I held in my hand. A dark veil fell over my eyes, then a frightful headache and a pain in the chest. I strolled home. Air and light helped me, and when I got home, I slept for some time. My condition is such that I really should give up all working and thinking for some time to come, but that would be difficult even if I could afford it. Dear Frederick, in recent weeks it has been positively impossible for me to write even 2 hours a day. Apart from pressure without there are the household headaches which always affect my liver. I have become sleepless again and have had the pleasure of seeing 2 carbuncles bloom near the penis. Fortunately, they faded away. My illness always comes from the head.
Charcot related male hysteria to trauma. As the industrial era progressed, the number of unexplained work-related illnesses increased enormously. Charcot worked to demonstrate how these could be understood as hysterical.
Dear Frederick, the doctor is quite right. The excessive night work was the main cause of the relapse.
It was an infection by ideas.
The most disgusting thing for me was the interruption of my work. But I have drudged on, lying down, even if only at short intervals during the day. I could not proceed with the purely theoretical part. The brain was too weak for that. Hence, I have enlarged the historical part on the workday, which lay outside the original plan.
Like other symptomatics of the day, he took the cure.
The medical world had devised various techniques for palliating an irritated and erupting human nervous system. Popular techniques included warm milk and bed rest, hydrotherapy and sojourns at peaceful pastoral spas. Doctors intuitively offered patients physical and psychological means to flee psychocultural stress, sending patients to the country, the sea, the mountains. Marx tried all of these. On doctor's orders, he fled his work.
Dear Frederick, so far I've had 2 sulfur baths, tomorrow the 3rd. From the bath, one steps on a raised board in the altogether. The bath attendant alternately bombards all parts of the corpus except for the head for 3 minutes, first strongly, then weakly up to the legs and feet, and always advancing crescendo. You can see how little desire a man has to write here.
Removing himself from his work brought some relief.
Dear Frederick, from the delayed appearance of this letter, you can see how professionally I use my time here. I read nothing, write nothing. Because of the arsenic 3 times daily, one has time only for meals and strolling along the coast and the neighboring hills. There is no time left for other things. Evenings one is too tired to do anything but sleep.
His symptoms began to speak him.
My dear daughter, I am afflicted with an inflammation of the eye. Not that there is much to be seen of it. The eye is taken to the vicious habit of shedding tears on its own account, without the least regard to the feelings of his master.
The carbuncles continue to erupt, stalling the writing of capital, inscribing themselves into the text. Marx focused doggedly on the labouring body, while his own body exploded into new and ever-changing configurations, as if fearful of the effect of introducing the unregimented body into the realm of the political.
But then this brings other bodies into the picture. The desiring body, the woman's body, the undisciplined body.
Marx, even in the most dire poverty, did what he could to maintain a bourgeois household. It was Helene de Muth, the servant, who marked his own separation from the working class. She, more than Marx, straddles 2 worlds, belonging to both the bourgeois family and the working class. She was certainly the member of that world that Marx knew best.
Dear Laura, some recent Russian publications, printed in Holy Russia, not abroad, show the great run of my theories in that country. Nowhere is my success more delightful to me. It gives me the satisfaction that I damage a power which, besides England, is the true bulwark of the old society.
For the 19th century bourgeois male, the servant provokes social anxiety. She was 10 years younger than Marx's wife, Jenny. Lenchen, as she was called, ran the Marx household. Often Marx was too poor to pay her, but she cast her lot with the Marx family. She did the cooking, house cleaning, laundering, dressmaking, nursing, and everything else, including taking the bed sheets to the pawn shop when eviction was threatened. In 1851, at age 28, she gave birth to Marx's son, secretly.
Marx wrote to Engels of a very tangled family situation, hinting at a mystery, a tragicomic mystery, in which he, Engels, also played a role. Marx travelled to Manchester to see Engels, where the 2 negotiated Lenchen's fate.
As men are accustomed to negotiating the fate of women's bodies.
Marx persuaded Engels to accept paternity for Lenchen's child, who was named Frederick after him in the custom of patrilineage. Engels accepted responsibility for the child, binding the 2 men together over Helene's mute body, over the body of the working-class woman.
I never betrayed the secret. I let my baby be brought up in a working-class family. Engels occasionally sent money, but Marx never acknowledged Freddie as his son. He never acknowledged paternity.
As men are accustomed to negotiating the fate of women's bodies.
After Marx's death, I moved into Engels' home as his housekeeper. My son Freddie visited regularly once a week. However, as an ordinary working man, he entered through the kitchen.
Oh, it looks like you're gaining a little weight, and he's just kidding. Even though, like, he's kidding, or at least he says he's kidding.
Oh, he's not
you
kidding.
take
It's
it
his way of dropping a
seriously.
settlement.
Oh, great.
And I know he's just looking at me like, maybe you should start dieting.
Sure, I think I need to lose a few. And you're like, lose a few? Yeah.
You're walking down the street and you're like, look at her legs compared to mine.
Yeah,
Look
but
at her
think
arms
about it
compared to
that
mine.
they're looking at you at the same time. Have you ever done a naked thing where you jump in front of the mirror?
What? No.
You've never done that? Okay, no, you're supposed to do this. You're naked. I do it all the time. And you jump in front of the mirror and you see how much. It's still jumping when you stop. The most
That seems like
appalling sight.
self-torture to me.
It is the.
First of all, I would never ever sit like that. Ever, with your legs
I
up.
wouldn't be able to.
Once the legs go up, the stomach goes down,
Wait.
and anything, I guess I would do my stomach, because I hate my
Really?
legs.
My legs is what I
I'm
would
okay
never
from
expose.
here up. Anything below.
He simply chose not to acknowledge paternity. I didn't have that choice.
You want a continuance so you can murder your baby. Is that it? I can't define it, but I know it when I see it.
They want to ban pornography because it tells the truth.
Get your laws off my body.
How could I live in my body? Where could I live in my body?
How could I live in my body? Where could I live in my body? Dear Engels, I had decided not to write you until I could announce the completion of the book, which is now the case. Also, I did not want to bore you with the reason for the frequent delays, namely carbuncles on the posterior and in the vicinity of the penis, the remains of which are now fading and which permit me to assume a sitting, that is, writing position, only at great pain. I do not take arsenic because it makes me too stupid, and at least for the little time that I have when writing is possible, I want to have a clear head.
Finishing the book left his body racked and scarred. He was subject to increasing outbursts with each new translation of the book. He continued to search for a cure.
My dear Jenny, I am sending you today the proofs of the French translation of Das Kapital. Today is the first day that I've been able to do anything at all. It is also the reason why I'm postponing my return, because it is absolutely necessary to return in a condition for work.
The eruptions of his body were not matched by the social eruptions he anticipated.
Dear Sorge, how did it happen that in the U.S., where, relatively that is, compared to civilized Europe, land was accessible to the great masses of people, and to a certain degree, again relatively, still is, the capitalist economy and the corresponding enslavement of the working class have developed more rapidly and more shamelessly than in any country?
Marx came to regard the carbuncles as having a life of their own. His affliction had a theory and a practice.
Dear Frederick, the doctor has opened up the pleasant prospect that I will have to deal with this loathsome disease until late in January. Still, this second Frankenstein on my hump is by far not so fierce as was the first in London. You can see this from the fact that I am able to write. If one wants to vomit politics out of nausea, one must take it daily in the form of telegraphic pills, such as are delivered by the newspapers.
How could I live in my body? Where could I live in my body?
Where is the history of the body written?
In your symptoms.
Once, power resided in the person of the king. The people's task was clear. Get rid of the king.
Qu'est-ce qu'il y a? Sire, les Parisiens ont pris la Bastille. Oh. Oh. C'est donc une révolte? Non, sire. C'est une révolution.
Once, power resided in repressive state bureaucracies. The people's task was clear. Smash the state. At certain moments in history, power is centralized and visible. The sites of repression are clear and identifiable. Resistance movements arise out of those relations of subordination and antagonism. At other moments, the task is less clear. Power is entrenched but dispersed. Where does power reside? Who are the agents of change?
Dear Frederick, I hope that with this I will have paid my debt to nature. In my state of ill health, I can do little writing, and then only by fits and starts. At any rate, I hope the bourgeoisie will remember my carbuncles all the rest of their lives.
Son, you ain't done nothing if you ain't been called a red. If you've marched or agitated, then you're bound to hear it said. You might as well ignore it or love the words instead, 'cause you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called a red. So I kept on agitating, 'cause what else can you do? Are you gonna let those sons of bitches walk all over you? A friend said, you'll get fired hanging with that commie mob. I should only have such troubles, buddy. I ain't got a job. So I've been agitating now for 20 years and more for employment and equality and always against war. I'll be doing it forever, just as far as I can see. And if that's what being red is, then it's good enough for me. 'Cause you ain't done nothing if you ain't been called a red. If you've marched or agitated, then you're bound to hear it said. You might as well ignore it or love the words instead. No, you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called a rise, ye prisoners of starvation. You ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called a red.